Everyone has heard the name Magellan, the man who sailed around the world. But here's what most people don't know. Magellan never made it around the world. He died a little more than halfway through the journey, on a small island most of the world had never heard of, killed in a battle that lasted less than an hour. This is the story of what happened on that island, built only from what was actually written down at the time by the one man who was standing there. Where historians disagree, or where legend has taken over from fact, this will say so directly. Nothing here is presented as certain unless the record actually supports it. Let's start with the source itself, because it matters more than almost anything else in this story. Almost everything we know about the death of Magellan comes from one document, the journal of Antonio Pigafetta, an Italian nobleman who talked his way onto the voyage as a chronicler. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't there to fight. He was there to write down what happened, and he did, in detail, almost every day of the journey. His journal is the only eyewitness account of the battle that killed Magellan. Every other version of this story, Spanish histories written decades later, modern retellings, murals, statues, school textbooks, traces back either to Pigafetta's words or to local oral tradition collected centuries afterward. Keeping that distinction in mind is the only way to tell fact from legend here. Now, the background. In March of 1521, 5 ships and roughly 270 men reached the islands that would later be called the Philippines. They had just crossed an ocean nobody in Europe had a name for yet. Magellan called it the Pacific because for 98 days it stayed calm. His men were exhausted. Several had already died of scurvy. His name was Raja Humabon, the ruler of Cebu. Pigafetta describes him as shrewd and quick to see opportunity. Within days of Magellan's arrival, Humabon and his wife converted to Catholicism, taking the names Carlos and Juana after the king and queen of Spain. The two men sealed their new alliance with a blood compact, a local tradition in which each party draws blood from their own arm and drinks it mixed with wine, a ritual Pigafetta himself witnessed and recorded. Humabon then did something that mattered a great deal a few weeks later. He sent word to every chief on the surrounding islands, ordering them to convert to Christianity and to supply Magellan's ships with food. According to Pigafetta, nearly every chief obeyed. One did not. His name, as Pigafetta wrote it, was Lapu-Lapu. Most historians agree this refers to the man known today as Lapu-Lapu, one of 2 chiefs on the small island of Mactan, just across the strait from Cebu. It's worth being precise about what he actually refused. He wasn't making a defiant stand against European colonization. As an abstract idea, there's no evidence he understood Spain as a colonial power in that sense at all. What the record shows is narrower, and honestly, more interesting. Lapu-Lapu refused to recognize Humabon's authority over him. The 2 chiefs had an existing rivalry over land and status that predated Magellan's arrival by years. When Humabon tried to fold Lapu-Lapu into his new alliance with the Spanish, Lapu-Lapu said no to Humabon, not necessarily to Spain itself. Humabon saw an opportunity to use his new, heavily armed allies to settle that old score. He suggested that Magellan sail to Mactan and force Lapu-Lapu into line. Magellan agreed. Pigafetta's journal suggests 2 reasons. First, to strengthen the alliance with Humabon, his most valuable partner in the region. Second, and this part is more interpretation than hard fact, a sense of confidence bordering on overconfidence in what a small force of armored gun-carrying Europeans could accomplish against local warriors. That second motive is inferred from how the battle unfolded, not stated outright by Pigafetta. A reasonable reading of the events, but an inference all the same. Here is what actually happened according to the journal. On the night of April 26th, Magellan sent a message to Mactan demanding recognition of Spanish and Cebuano authority, along with tribute. According to Pigafetta, Lapu-Lapu's men refused and asked the Spanish to wait until morning, saying they wanted time to gather more men, a request Magellan granted for reasons the journal doesn't explain. Before dawn on April 27, 1521, Magellan led 49 armored men across 3 small boats toward the island. He left most of the fleet's cannons behind on the larger ships, apparently trusting that European weapons and armor would be more than sufficient against local fighters he had not yet faced in direct combat. The tide worked against him immediately. It was low, and wide coral reefs stretched far out from the shore, farther than the boats could travel without running aground. That meant the ships carrying the heaviest weapons couldn't get close enough to fire in support. Magellan and his men had to climb out of the boats and wade toward the beach. Weapons raised, through water described as reaching their thighs, for a distance Pigafetta measured as more than 2 crossbow shots. This single detail, the reef, the tide, the distance did more to determine the outcome of the battle than anything about bravery or weaponry on either side. Waiting on the shore were, by Pigafetta's own count, around 1,500 warriors. It's important to flag this clearly. Modern historians widely consider that number exaggerated. Whether by Pigafetta himself, by the chaos and fear of the moment, or by later copying errors in the manuscript, nobody today claims to know the real number with confidence. What isn't disputed is that Lapu-Lapu's forces significantly outnumbered Magellan's landing party, and that they were fighting on ground they knew, with weapons suited to it: iron-tipped bamboo spears, fire-hardened stakes, and, according to the journal, poisoned arrows aimed specifically at the Spaniards' legs, the one part of their bodies their armor didn't cover. The fighting lasted, in Pigafetta's own words, a little more than 1 hour. He describes crossbows and muskets fired into the chaos of the surf, doing far less damage than Magellan's side expected, partly because the wet conditions and unstable footing made aim difficult, and partly because there simply wasn't time to reload while under constant attack. He describes the moment the battle turned decisively. Lapu-Lapu's men recognized which of the Spaniards was giving orders, identified him as Magellan by his more elaborate armor and bearing, and concentrated their attack on him specifically. Magellan was struck in the leg and went down. Pigafetta's account describes what happened next as a group action, not a single duel. There is no account, from Pigafetta or anyone else writing at the time, of a one-on-one confrontation between Magellan and Lapu-Lapu. That detail, the popular image of 2 men facing off, is not supported by the primary source. It is a later dramatization, repeated in art and film for centuries, not a documented fact. In fact, there's a strong case that Lapu-Lapu was not in the fighting at all. He was, by most historical estimates, around 70 years old at the time of the battle, a detail that doesn't fit the muscular warrior imagery common in murals and statues. Historians studying the Pigafetta account point out that his journal never once describes Lapu-Lapu personally striking a blow, giving an order in combat, or being physically present in the fighting itself. The likely explanation is that Lapu-Lapu, given his age, directed the defense from a safer position while younger warriors carried out the fighting. To be clear, this is an inference built from the silence in the record, not a fact directly stated anywhere, but it's the most consistent reading available, and it means the man credited for centuries with personally killing Magellan may never have touched him. 8 of Magellan's men died alongside him in the battle. Pigafetta himself was wounded by a poisoned arrow to the forehead and barely made it back to the boats. On the other side, Pigafetta recorded only 15 dead and 24 wounded. Whatever the real numbers were on either side, the accounts agree the losses were deeply lopsided against the defenders, not the attackers. A detail that complicates the popular image of a heroic underdog victory purchased at great cost. It appears, from the numbers alone, to have gone badly for the Spanish and relatively lightly for Lapu-Lapu's side. What happened after the battle is just as well documented, and just as revealing. Raja Humabon, who along with his ally Datu Zula had watched the fighting from a distance at Magellan's own request, tried to recover Magellan's body. According to Pigafetta, he offered Lapu-Lapu a ransom of copper and iron, whatever the warriors wanted, in exchange for the remains. Lapu-Lapu refused every offer. He intended to keep the body as a trophy of the victory. What actually happened to Magellan's remains afterward was never recorded by Pigafetta or anyone else present. Centuries later, European writers began claiming the body had been eaten by Lapu-Lapu's warriors. This claim has no basis in any surviving primary source. It appears nowhere in Pigafetta's account. It is a myth, likely born from European assumptions about non-European peoples at the time, not a documented event. A few days after the battle, Humabon turned on the remaining Spanish crew. He invited a group of survivors to a feast and had them poisoned, an act Pigafetta attributes directly to Humabon, and one that suggests the alliance that had seemed so solid weeks earlier depended entirely on Magellan personally, and collapsed the moment he was gone. The remaining crew, reduced to roughly 110 men, sailed on without their commander. Command eventually passed through several officers before settling with Juan Sebastián Elcano, who brought the last surviving ship, the Victoria, back to Spain in September of 1522, completing the first circumnavigation of the globe, a voyage Magellan had started. but did not live to finish. Now, what happened to the memory of this event over the following 5 centuries is its own story, and one worth being just as careful about separating fact from framing. For roughly 300 years, Spanish colonial accounts, when they mentioned Lapu-Lapu at all, generally remembered him as the man who killed a great explorer, framed as an obstacle to the arrival of Christianity and civilization. In 1866, the Spanish colonial government built a stone monument on Mactan, marking the spot local tradition held to be where Magellan died. Notably, the marker described his death only as coming at the hands of the natives, without naming Lapu-Lapu directly. It's also worth noting plainly, the exact location of the battle was never confirmed by any contemporary 550-21 source. The site, now marked by shrines and monuments, is based on an 1839 Spanish colonial investigation into local oral tradition, more than 300 years after the event. A reasonable historical reconstruction, but not a location fixed by eyewitness record. Filipino national memory of the event shifted substantially over the 20th century, and especially in recent decades. Today, the city surrounding the battle site is named Lapu-Lapu City, home to roughly 500,000 people. April 27th is observed as a national holiday, Lapu-Lapu Day. There's a large monument, a shrine, an annual reenactment, and a species of grouper fish eaten across the Philippines that carries his name. On the 500th anniversary of the battle in 2021, the Philippine government marked the day explicitly as the victory at Mactan, rather than the death of a European explorer, framing Lapu-Lapu's resistance as the first documented act of Filipino defiance against a European power. So which framing is accurate? The 19th century Spanish monument calling Magellan a fallen figure of civilization, or the modern Filipino holiday calling Lapu-Lapu the nation's first hero? Strictly by the surviving eyewitness record, neither framing is quite what happened. Pigafetta's journal doesn't describe a clash of civilizations or a legend in the making. It describes a local political rivalry between 2 chiefs, a costly miscalculation about tides and coral reefs, a battle decided in under an hour by superior local knowledge of the terrain, in a death that took only moments once the tide of combat turned. Everything built on top of that hour since then, the monuments, the holidays, the myths about Magellan's body, even the image of a personal duel between 2 men, is the meaning that later generations on both sides chose to build from those facts. The facts themselves are specific, limited, and, in places, genuinely uncertain. The meaning people have given them since is enormous and still growing 500 years later.